first-time home buyers don't have an extra 10 grand sitting aside so they can buy their representation and actually have an ally in this. So in the future, are you going to have to pay for your agent yourself as a buyer buying a house? Will this be an additional expense that you're going to have to incur and take into account while going to look for houses? So there's been a lot of activity with real estate lawsuits involving commissions and how they're set up right now. And the other week, the DOJ came out in support of decoupling commissions, meaning that they want to separate the buyer's commission and the seller's commission. So I'm going to dive into that subject. I'll link the article that I'm kind of basing this off of down in the description below. But let's get into what they're actually saying, and then I'll give you my thoughts as an agent who's in this field every day, and it's how I make my money. So a little bit important to me. So let's get into that right now. So the current way commissions are set up is that the real estate agents, buyer and seller agents, get paid from the listing brokerage, meaning when a seller goes to hire an agency, they hire an agent who of course works under a brokerage. They sign a listing agreement with that agent, technically the brokerage, agreeing to pay them a fee at the time of closing for selling their house, and that fee is typically a percentage of the sales price. Then once the property actually closes, the listing broker receives the payment, and then they split it out to the listing agent and the buyer's agent. And it doesn't matter who the buyer's agent's with. It doesn't have to be with the same company. It can just be whoever it is. So what is happening is sellers are feeling that they're forced to pay a high percentage for listing their property because they feel they're the one in charge of paying the buyer's agent, and they don't feel that's right. They also say that they think that the buyer should be able to negotiate with their agent to pay them, which they actually feel is the right amount to pay them, and they want to have that negotiation separate and actually have the buyer in control of that, because right now it's really just set in the MLS, and I'll discuss a little bit of that more later. So again, the DOJ is favoring the side of decoupling commissions and having it completely separate. So when you list a house, you as the seller agree with the listing brokerage on a percentage, and then that is strictly what you're paying, is just the listing brokerage. You're not paying the buyer brokerage. So you're just paying the listing brokerage. Then as a buyer, you are responsible for going out and finding a buyer's agent, and then you guys sit down and negotiate on what type of fee you want to pay them. Again, it's probably going to be a percentage of the sales price. So that's kind of what the DOJ is leaning for. They want to decouple it. Now let me give you my thoughts on this situation and kind of some hiccups I see in the road, and also some things that I don't necessarily see as much of a problem as others do. And also, just an FYI, I am just a real estate agent. I'm not anyone special or professional on all these accusations and all these cases that are being brought up in the lawsuits. I'm just putting in my input as an agent. So there's a few points I want to hit on. And first, we're going to start out with, this is how it's always been since buyer agency has began. Because back in the day, buyer's agency wasn't a thing. When you went to go buy a house, you just had to deal with the listing agent because it was just an agreement between the listing agent and the seller, and then buyers would kind of just come as they came, and they would, usually you would because it wasn't an online database, so you would just call real estate agencies and see what listings they had, and then you would use them to buy it. So they had literally zero representation throughout the transactions back in the day. And then in the late 1990s is when buyers actually started getting legal representation, meaning they actually had an ally in the transaction, someone that's actually looking out for their back and making sure that they're not getting screwed over. And when this started, selling agents would just split their commission, kind of 50-50 is usually how it went. Of course, they get 50, and then the buyer's agent will get 50 because they brought half the deal there. Now, this personally makes sense to me because it's allowing the buyer to have representation. And when you're a home seller, you're agreeing with the listing agent for a fee to sell their house. So even if you sign a contract and for some reason that listing agent and the brokerage doesn't do their job and doesn't sell a house, well, guess what? You don't owe them any money. But when you set up and agree to a set percentage to sell the house for, well, guess what? A buyer has to come and actually buy your house. So buyer agents are super important to these sellers. And just because they're not technically working directly for the seller doesn't mean that they're not trying their hardest to sell that house to their buyers, because guess what? That's how they get paid. They know that's how they get paid. So they're going to try to sell your house if they kind of know, hey, the only way I get this is if I sell this house to my buyer and the seller pays. However, if this comes in and you're looking on the MLS and you see a house that offers 0% to the buyer's agent, as a buyer's agent, would you be pushing that house as hard as you would if you knew you were going to be making money from it? Or are you just going to be like, here's this house if you're kind of interested in it? Because do you really want to be pushing it to everyone you know, and then they reach out and be like, hey, yeah, I can show you that house, but just a little FYI, that's also going to cost you more money because now you have to pay me a fee for me to actually help you buy the house because they're not offering a fee. With that being said, it's just not how it's done right now. So I feel like buyers would just reject it completely. And in that situation, they would just start using the listing agent to buy their house to save them money so they don't have to pay a buyer's agent. But then if that all happened, you're just literally getting rid of the point of getting a buyer's agent in the first place, because now they just wouldn't pay for the buyer's agent and they would just use a listing agent, and then we're back to before the 1990s. So that's kind of the first problem I see. Is I don't really see the problem that's broken. Yes, are the sellers paying a lot to sell their house? I mean, all I've seen since I've been in real estate is commissions go down. When I started, they were around 6 or 7. Now they're down to 5 or 4% of the sales price. So I don't know what we're getting complained here. Kind of real estate agents are already working themselves down the line. And now let's just play the scenario, say they did switch this up, and buyers and the buyer's agent are completely responsible for the commission and all that. So just a little backstory of how it works right now is when you're a buyer's agent, you sign an agreement with a buyer. In that document, you're already agreeing to the certain fee that the buyer's agent is going to get from the sale of this. So sometimes you'll see like buyer's agent to accept 2% minimum fee or whatever's listed in the MLS. So with that being stated is the buyer's agent is knowing he's getting 2% minimum. So right now, there still are listings that go on the MLS with like a 1% commission. So even in that scenario, right now, the buyer is responsible for coming up with the other percent if he wants to make an offer on that house, and because he agreed to pay his buyer's agent 2%. And of course, if it's over 2%, well, then all the better, the agent makes a little bit more money. But put yourself in the position of a buyer. If you're sitting there already staring down the biggest financial expense of your life and knowing that you're going to have to come up typically with 5 to 10% of the purchase price already, are you going to want to throw another 2-3% on top of that you're going to have to come out of pocket just to pay your buyer's agent? Because right now, the way it's worked is it's technically coupled into the sales price, because the buyer pays the sales price and then the proceeds go to the seller, and then out of the seller's proceeds, the agents get paid. But like, if the buyer doesn't pay the seller doesn't get any money in the first place. And the other thing that the DOJ mentioned in that article is, well, they don't want the buyers having to come up with an extra 2% cash out of pocket because they know that's going to hurt the market. And again, buyers probably are just going to go without representation if they don't have the money. So what they're trying to say is that they would put it into the purchase contract as a concession. What this means is you would just be asking the seller to pay concessions to the buyer so that the buyer can pay their agent. It's the same fucking thing. They're just talking in a circle. That is the same thing as if they just signed it in the first place and then commissions got split. It's the same thing. Now, the other one I saw, which is a little bit scary because I just don't think you should be taking advantage of home buyers that are already right now, especially with how high the market is, kind of struggling to get into a house. They want to say, hey, you don't have to come up with that 2% out of pocket. We'll just give you another loan for it and you can pay us off that way. Which, like, yes, is it convenient? Sure, but I don't think it's a good solution. You're just getting them in even more debt. And then someone actually I was talking to the other day brought up a good idea. Well, if you get a loan for that and now you have to pay that off, is it going to mess up your debt to income ratio and you couldn't even close on the house? So there's just a lot of things that go into this. But these are kind of my thoughts. Overall, I kind of think it's just a silly idea because I don't think buyers in the end are going to be coming up with cash, be like, here's 10 grand, thank you for helping me out. I don't think they have that most of the time unless they're like doing well. First time home buyers don't have an extra 10 grand sitting aside so they can buy their representation and actually have an ally in this. So I think it's set up pretty well right now. Maybe they can get a little bit more stringent on like what you're allowed, because right now you can literally you could go into the listing appointment and be like, yeah, I'm listing this for 12%. I mean, I doubt the seller would take it, but you can try. You're kind of free to do that, but I don't know if they set regulations with that, or I don't know how it has to work. Let me know what you think down below in the comments, but this is just a thing I keep seeing pop up, so I wanted to make a video on it in case any of you buyers out there are wondering what the heck is happening. Why are there so many lawsuits against commissions right now, and am I getting screwed as a buyer? No, but you could have to come up with more money down the road. Again, I think these things are a few years away. All this stuff moves very slowly, but that's just what I'm seeing. So I hope you guys enjoyed this video. A little bit different, I know, but I just wanted to get this information out there. Hopefully it helps you guys as buyers. And if you need any help, reach out. I'd be happy to help. Thank you, and I will catch you guys next week.